This is a letter I wrote to my MP in May, re housing benefit cuts. I have already written several times to Mr McGovern the extracts of letters I have previously written. I want Mr McGovern to address the issues I raise and answer the questions I ask. I require him to raise the matters and issues directly with the Prime Minister's office and request answers from them on the subject. I also wish Mr McGovern to deal with the question of the legality of this bill. Recent news of the UK government's plans to impose a bedroom tax on the vulnerable sections of society has seen many reports in newspapers and activities by community groups announcing their concern for the people that this inconsiderate tax will persecute and impoverish. This tax will see many persecuted people facing eviction due to rent arrears, and victimised families have been devastated and split up. Many local communities and councils have set up action teams to protest against this measure and attempt to help tenants affected find a solution. There's not enough one-bedroom properties for the people in two-bedroom properties to downsize to. They have now been trapped and targeted with this unjust tax that shows just how insensitive and inconsiderate this government is. People on benefits cannot afford to make up the shortfall on the reduction of their housing benefit. An extra one bedroom sees a loss of 14%, with larger properties seeing a reduction of up to 25%. Dundee Council's estimation that 3,400 households affected in the city, with the total costs to tenants amounting to £1.3 million per year, with 583 of these households being affected by the larger reductions. All over the country, local authorities are finding they do not have suitable properties for people to downsize to. People who are claiming benefits do not have the finances to pay the shortfalls in their rent and don't have the ability to move to other accommodation. Even with the Scottish Government's proposed social fund measures to alleviate the impact, these reforms, with a £9 million top-up amounting to a total fund of £33 million for short-term discretionary payments to those hardship cases affected where they face the choice to heat or eat, and many families not able to feed their children. Action teams set up by the local authorities to interview and help tenants affected predict to have interviewed all the 2,000 tenants by the end of March. 320 of these are working age, with the remaining 1,900 in receipt of welfare benefits. Recent building improvement works to provide insulation cladding and new central heating systems predict a saving of 40% on fuel bills. But these measures have only been applied to a relatively small number of the properties within the city. The votes for this bill have been imposed on Scotland from Westminster due to the inclusion of the English and Welsh MPs. 316 MPs voted in favour of the bill and 263 voting against it, whereas if just the Scottish votes had been counted, 46 Scottish MPs voted against it and just 11 voted for the measure. The bill would have been overwhelmingly defeated. Now, this proposal seeks to remove people from their homes and attempt to rehouse them in substandard, expensive accommodation. It's time that this callous move be protested against and condemned as an infringement of civil liberties to a family life and an expectation of a protected and reasonable level of accommodation. And also that this insensitive imposition is a breach of human rights. I write to you in the expectation that you will register my condemnation of the government's measures and demand that the government abandon their divisive, inconsiderate persecution of the less well-off in society who rely on the assistance that the government seek to reduce and remove. Even with the assistance of the local councils in their housing options interviews, which they themselves accept have little choice for the tenants affected, as the councils have admitted there is no alternative accommodation to place people in. Of the few one-bedroom properties available in just Dundee, each of them have between 700 and 1,200 applicants, with the waiting time up to at least 7 years. I write protesting against the bedroom tax and object to the hypocritical attack on the vulnerable while tax cuts are granted to people with more than one many-roomed properties. I protest and condemn this welfare cut to the housing benefit as a discriminatory and hypocritical attack on the vulnerable people in society. Reducing the assistance deemed necessary by law to those requiring it most, while granting tax cuts to the wealthier property-owning members of society, shows a total lack of concern from this government. This government did not receive a winning majority following the recent election, and thus this government does not have a mandate or the consent of the country to govern. I deem this government to be an unlawful gathering. They do not have the consent of the country to be in authority as a government. I repeat my protest that this bedroom tax and question the reasoning that it will create no mobility and choice. There are no smaller properties to move to. The government has failed to provide smaller accommodation. A single person is given no choice and is made to pay for a property that they don't want. There's no mobility because there's no smaller properties available. There is no choice because the government has failed to supply suitable property. This is an attack and a hypocritical move, not giving the tenants a choice and then taxing them on something they have no control over. People in one-bedroom accommodation do not have to face cuts in their benefits, having to make decisions to heat or eat. Single people in one-bedroom houses do not have to budget with a loss of income. This move is discriminatory against the people who have no choice in their accommodation and cannot defend themselves. To be patronisingly told to make economies in our budget, that for the poorest vulnerable members of society have already been reduced to bare minimums, while seeing wealthier members awarded tax breaks on their many larger properties, who also continue spending and claiming expenses, is hypocritical and obscene. It's also become unpalatable when we see large amounts of government funds awarded to foreign countries while we are reduced to the state of paupers. I write to object and protest against the imposition of this bedroom tax that the government is persecuting vulnerable members of society with. This government has failed to encourage a nationwide building programme to provide smaller accommodation. This shows how blatantly inconsiderate this government is in victimising and persecuting people. To be told that by the Treasury that can't afford to continue supporting expenditure at current levels, that cutbacks must be made, and now we are told that £10 million has been made available for the state funeral of an ex-Prime Minister. This is a blatant abuse of the trust of the country and cannot be allowed to continue. This government did not achieve an overall majority in the recent elections and thus does not have the consent of the country to govern. This government does not have the authority to impose such draconian laws on the country. I urge you to demand the government abandon this bedroom tax and end the victimisation and persecution of vulnerable members of society.